Hi, moms and dads. Dr. Nicole Birkins here. I want to talk with you today about COVID-19, or this novel coronavirus that has been labeled a pandemic by the World Health Organization. It has been growing around the world and now has reached the United States, and certainly emotions and concerns are running high around how we address this, particularly when it comes to our children and our families. I've been asked a lot in recent days by parents, by professionals, by media about how we can best address this with our children and how we can support them through this. So I want to talk to you about that today, both as a licensed clinical child psychologist, a board-certified nutrition specialist, and as a mom of 4 kids. Throughout the United States, schools, businesses, organizations are starting to put protocols in place. There are quarantines happening. Many children throughout the country are being told that they're going to be staying home from school. So certainly this is something that is in children's awareness. It is affecting our families. So I want to address some of the big picture issues of how we can best support kids, and also respond to specific questions that people have emailed to me or called about. So we'll cover all of that in this video. One of the first most important things to remember is that children will use parents and other close adults in their life as a model for how anxious or concerned or distressed they need to be about something. And that's important to remember in a situation like this, because as adults, we should be appropriately concerned and vigilant about this situation, but we want to be mindful of how we're exhibiting the emotions and the things that we may be experiencing around this, because our kids pick up on that, even really young children. So a first really important thing to keep in mind with supporting kids through this is to be mindful of our own reactions. If you're feeling really anxious or really stressed about this, that's legitimate, but be cautious about how you're presenting that to your kids. The more calm and factual we can stay, the better off it's going to be in approaching this with our children. If they see us getting really overreactive, really anxious, expressing a lot of fear in both our words and our behavior around this, then they are going to be very fearful and very anxious about it as well, and that's not what we want to convey. So being mindful of our own reactions and staying as calm and factual as possible is really important. Also very important to keep open lines of communication and talk with kids at a developmentally appropriate level about what's happening. Some parents say to me, should I bring it up at all? Maybe it's just best not to talk about it. The reality is that we live in a very 24/7 connected society. Virtually all kids, unless they're really young, have been exposed to some information about this, whether it's online, at school, through friends, however. So it is important that we be a source of valid, factual, helpful information for them. We don't ever want to make it seem like we're hiding things from them or preventing them, from knowing what's going on. But obviously the conversation that we have and the information that we share is going to be different with a young child as compared to an older child or a teenager. So we want to keep their developmental level in mind. In general, it's best to stick to factual information. Here's what we know. Here's what we don't know. Here's what is important for us to be thinking about now. And don't go overboard with information, particularly with young kids. A general rule of thumb when kids are asking questions is that we just answer the questions that they're bringing to us, and that we don't elaborate and go way beyond what they're asking, because often then we can be confusing to them or provide way more than what they were ready to hear or even able to understand. So if kids are bringing questions, be very open about that. Be willing to respond, but just respond to the question that they're asking, and then let them, go on their way and be okay with that. We want kids to know that we are going to provide them additional information as we're aware of it. One of the things that's hard for us as parents and adults working with kids right now is there are a lot of unknowns. And so it's important to be honest about that, but to let kids know that as we have more information, we will be sure to let them know so that they don't feel anxious or worried that they're not going to have information that they need or that we're going to keep things from them. It's also important to talk about what is actually known and what the facts are. And if you have an older elementary school or up through high school age child, this is actually a good opportunity to do some work with them around where can we get good sources of factual information about things like this that are going on, and how to vet sources online, how to maybe take information that they may have seen in a chat room or heard on the school bus compared to information that they might find on a reputable health website or from their physician or something like that. So helping them think through, where can I get good information? Who is providing valid information? And what kinds of information maybe we should view as not being accurate, or we should ask more questions about. This is a really important skill to work on with kids across the board in this day and age, and this provides us an opportunity to do that. It's also important to provide the facts and the information that we have, and not sugarcoat that, but also not be overly alarmist about it. It's important that kids know that yes, this is a virus, this is an illness that makes people sick. And here's what we know about what happens to the vast majority of people. They develop some cold and flu symptoms. You can talk about how people in the family, maybe even they have had, colds and flus before. Here's the kinds of symptoms. It's important to say that yes, some people do die from these kinds of illnesses. Again, we don't want to lie to kids or make it seem like we're withholding important information from them. We want them to trust us. So it's important to say yes, some people do get very sick and have to go to the hospital. Some people even die. However, it's not the majority of people, and here's what we know about that. Again, the information that you share with a preschooler or early elementary school child is going to be different than how we talk about that with older kids, but it's important to just be calm and factual about sharing this information, and also frame it as, yep, this is what's going on, but these are not things that the vast majority of people need to be concerned about happening, and that's really important for kids to know. Children are going to have all kinds of feelings about these kinds of things. Some may just take the information and go, okay, that's great, now I know, and move on. Some kids may get very anxious or very hesitant or very worried or stressed out about these things. That can show up in a variety of ways. It's important to acknowledge however your child is feeling about it. So if they express concern, worry, those kinds of feelings, don't minimize that. It's important not to say to a child, oh, you don't need to worry, don't worry about that. They're feeling worried, and we need to validate that and acknowledge that you're feeling worried about that. That's understandable. You know what? I'm feeling a little worried about it too. It's okay to feel worried, and then you go back to using facts and information and some of the strategies that we'll talk about next to help them through that. But to honor and validate how they're feeling is a really important thing. Also, one thing, because some questions have come up about some of the language and the big words that are used around this. And this is important to talk about with kids too, and not assume that they understand what these words mean. They may overhear conversations that adults are having that are not even intended for them, or things on TV or on social media, words like quarantine, even words like coronavirus, words like death rate, these kinds of things that, kids may come up with their own meaning for that. They may not have a good way of understanding that. So it's important to define those terms for them. You know what? Here's what a quarantine means. You know what? Here's what the word pandemic means. And again, using simple language depending on their age, but just being clear and factual about it so that they're not scared simply because they don't understand what the words mean. So that's important. I talked about using facts to combat fear, and that's one of the biggest tools that we have in our tool chest for helping people, and children in particular, to manage their anxieties. Anxiety is all about the unknown. It's about the uncertainties. It's about trying to manage things that we don't really understand or feel like are going to get out of control or that we can't anticipate. So the more we can ground ourselves and our kids with facts, the better. So again, going back to the factual information of what we know so far, of things that are being done to help keep us safe, those are really important. And speaking of that, it's really important to focus with children on what we can control. This is critical, and there are so many things that we can point to that we can control. So here's some examples of things to talk about with kids. And again, this provides really a nice learning opportunity for them in many ways. So things we can control. Number one, we can control our hand washing and our hygiene. If nothing else comes out of this, there is some silver lining here in kids really learning how to properly wash their hands and use good hygiene practices in their lives. And that's always a good thing. So proper hand washing, something we can control. Teaching them, here's how you wash your hands. Here's how to be thorough. All kinds of videos and handouts and information available out there right now on that for kids of all ages. So by all means, look those up and use those if you'd like to, but helping them understand this is a way that we can control this. Here's how we wash our hands. Here's when we want to wash our hands, and focusing on that. Controlling things like how we keep ourselves healthy. Drinking plenty of water. Cutting down on sugary beverages and sugary junk stuff in general because it doesn't support our immune system and it makes us more susceptible to illness. Eating our fruits and vegetables. Focusing on the things that we can control to support our health as parents, as children, as families. This is a really great lesson to focus on around this topic of how do we help prevent ourselves as much as possible from getting sick? How do we help our body and our immune system be healthy so that when we do get sick, which is a normal thing that happens sometimes, our body's able to fight it off well and we move through it without a major problem. So focusing on the nutrition and health pieces of that, which include sleeping well. Getting plenty of sleep, that supports our immune system. So talking with kids about having our bedtimes, keeping our sleep routines, making sure that we're sleeping well, not staying up, especially for our teenagers, not staying up all hours of the night, even on weekends. We want to keep our system healthy, and sleep is one important way to do that. We can control who we're around, not going over to a friend's house or going to events where we know that there are people who are ill who are there. And the same way that if we know that we're ill, not going over to someone else's house or going to events where we might get someone else sick. That's something that we can control. Another area that we have control over is how much we expose ourselves and our children to information about this. So while it is certainly valuable to get information from online sources, from TV, we want to be mindful of how much we're doing that and not get caught in this constant cycle of exposing ourselves to potentially inflammatory, negative, scary information over and over again. Check in with those resources, maybe a couple times a day just to find out, new information, what's going on. But otherwise, turn the TV off, stay off of the news sites online, help kids explore other kinds of things that they can be exposed to and use their time with. And in general, just not having overexposure to screen time in general is always a good, healthy habit. It's important to continue doing activities that kids enjoy and find stress relieving. Stress is a major way that we tax our immune system, and when we're stressed out all the time, we have immune systems that don't work as effectively, and that makes us get sick more easily. So focusing on continuing to do life activities that are enjoyable, continuing to spend time with people that we enjoy as long as there's not illness present, and continuing to do those regular life activities is something else that we can control. Now, a big topic that has come up, particularly in the last few days as colleges and universities are closing, and now we've got elementary school, middle school, high schools, preschools, daycares closing down, and parents are emailing and calling and going, what do we do? Our kids now are, home for a couple weeks, maybe longer. How do we best manage this? How do we explain this to them? So some things to keep in mind that are going to be really helpful during this time if your kids are out of school, if you're home from work with them, if everybody's kind of at home while we manage this. The first thing that's important to remember for kids is that keeping routines in place as much as possible cuts down on anxiety and stress and just helps them function better. Keeps their mood and their emotional and behavioral regulation in a better place. So as much as you can keep routines that are typically in place or establish routines for how these weeks are going to go when they're home, that's important. Now, that means they don't have to necessarily wake up at exactly the same time that they might if they were going to school, although for younger kids, that's very appropriate. But we want to keep good daytime and nighttime routines. So our teenagers should not be using these days to sleep in until noon or 1. We want to get up, we want to have our day be our daytime, and then our nighttime be our nighttime, and stay in normal life activities at home as much as possible. Those routines are just critical. They benefit everybody in the family, particularly if you have younger kids. That structure will be helpful. Speaking of structure, provide a structure for the day. Even sketching out a little list or a little schedule of, hey, here's how we're going to handle these days, or here's what today is going to look like, because there can be a lot of uncertainty around that for kids. They're not really on vacation. There's nothing planned for that. They're home unexpectedly. They're not doing, their normal things at school. So sketch out a structure of, here's how the day's going to go. We're going to get up, we're going to have breakfast, then, let's do some of these kinds of things. Maybe you can have some playtime, then we're going to have lunch, and just help them get a flow of the day in their head, and that will really help everybody function more effectively. Along those lines, it can also be really beneficial to give kids a menu or a list of activities that they can choose from. All of us who are parents know that when our kids are together in the house for any extended period of time, you get all kinds of challenges that come up, right? Everything from the whining and complaints of, I'm bored, there's nothing to do, to fights that break out between siblings, all of those kinds of things. So what will be helpful during these extended periods of time when everybody's home together is to give kids a menu or a list of things that they can be directed to help them choose appropriate activities. And again, those are age appropriate activities. Maybe, you help them make a list of, here's a bunch of toys or games that you have that you haven't done in a while. Include craft activities, reading, movement activities, music kinds of things. Some screen time is okay. Legos, all of those kinds of things that maybe aren't top of mind for them. Now they're going to have a lot more time. Give them something that if they start to complain that they're bored, they don't know what to do, they start getting in, scuffles with their siblings, that you can say, hey, let's go back to the list. Why don't you pick something off of there, and let's do that for a bit. And that helps give some structure, and also gives you as a parent something that you're not trying to think on the fly all the time about what they can do. Some schools may be sending home some things that kids can do, academic wise, maybe some things on the computer. Those are helpful things to have on that list or to work into the day as well. I mentioned screen time earlier. I do think it's important to emphasize that excessive or overuse of screen time during these lengthy periods of time of kids being out of school is not going to be helpful to anyone, not just because of the exposure to maybe anxiety-provoking content, but it's just well established in the research literature that overuse of screen time, of digital media, has a negative impact on kids' behaviors, on their emotional regulation, on their sleep. It just isn't good for them, and it just makes things more challenging for us as parents. So it may be very important, if your kids are going to be off of school for an extended period of time, think about it like you might think about the summertime. What kinds of rules or boundaries need to be in place around screen time so that we're not having constant power struggles or arguments about it? We're not trying to get them off the devices all the time. Be clear about what the rules and expectations are, and that will help everybody just manage that better. Movement is an important thing. Even though kids may be, quarantined, they're not going to school, they're staying home. If the weather's nice, if they can get outside and they're feeling well, that's a great thing for them to do. Getting fresh air in the yard, getting physical movement, so valuable for kids. It's a great stress and anxiety reducer, gets them out of the house, doing some things, keeps them better regulated. So outside play, and if that's not a possibility because of weather or other circumstances, find opportunities for them to have physical movement indoors. Create an obstacle course in the basement. Find some videos that they can do kids exercises with, some kids yoga kinds of things that you can find, or whatever it might be. Give them a structured outlet for some physical activity indoors, and that will really be helpful as well. And another silver lining here, I want to encourage you, if your kids are going to be home for this period of time, engage them in things around the house. Kids can be participating in chores, helping to make meals, helping to clean things, do their laundry. This might be a great time to tackle some home projects that you've been putting off, and can be a great learning experience for kids. So there can be some silver linings here around new skills that we might be able to teach our kids, things that we can do with them together that strengthen our relationship with them. So try to look for those opportunities where this unexpected situation of us being home with our kids for an extended period of time can actually provide some really good value for our relationships and skill building for them. I want to touch on what to do if your child seems really, really anxious or panicked about this, because certainly some of you may have a child who is prone to higher anxiety in general, and a major health concern or issues like this that happen in the world can really exacerbate that and can take those anxieties to a level then that becomes really difficult to manage. If you are noticing that these kinds of strategies that that I'm talking about here, or the tools that you typically use to help your child to manage their anxiety or stay calm about things, those aren't working. They're escalating with their anxiety. They're getting really panicked. They're very fearful. All of this is just feeling like too much for them to handle, and you don't feel like you have the resources to manage it with them. Don't hesitate to reach out for help. Talk to your child's primary healthcare provider, talk to school counselor if that's an option, reach out to a local mental health professional who specializes in working with children in your community, and get some suggestions and support around that. Typically, that can involve a professional working with the child on some healthy coping skills, better understanding what's going on and learning how to manage that, and giving you as parents some tools and guidance to best support your kids. So if you feel like it's beyond just a typical amount of anxiety, or it is really ramping up and making things very unmanageable for you and your child, don't hesitate to reach out to your local resources to get support for that. I think that really covers the main things that parents and others have been asking about, and that I wanted to touch on with you. It's just really important to remember that in times of uncertainty, in times where there are reasonable and appropriate fears about health concerns, about things like that going on, that we have an opportunity to model healthy, appropriate ways that our kids can handle that. And ultimately, these do become learning opportunities for them to develop the appropriate coping skills, the thinking skills, and the resilience to handle these kinds of things that are a part of normal life. So viewing it in that way, as an opportunity rather than something that we need to be really upset or distressed about, I think is a good way for all of us to view that. Certainly, there is a lot going on. There's a lot to think about. We need to manage our own anxieties around that and be an appropriate model and help our kids develop these skills that are going to serve them well as they move through their childhood and into adulthood. I think that's everything I wanted to cover. I want to thank you for watching this. And know that I will check back regularly in the comments. If you have questions, concerns, additional things maybe that I didn't cover, I will be happy to respond to you there. Thanks a lot for being here.